Hello, and welcome back to my podcast, Filmmaking Actually. Ta-da! One of the things that I've talked about is when it's okay for someone to work on a project, quote unquote, unpaid, meaning they don't get cash, but they get mentorship or supervision or actual hands-on experience. Now, one of the things that I realized is that some people don't actually know how to manage people. And I don't mean that as some you don't know what you're doing. I just mean that in there are management styles and there are ways of giving feedback and there are ways of coaching people and encouraging them and supporting them and things like that. And those styles are different depending on the type of person who's working for you. I wanted to dive into this a little bit more. I was thinking about some notes that I gave for an intern who was doing an edit for us. Now, to be clear, interns work on negligible projects. Either it's like a social media reel for Space Dream Productions, or it's like one of our internally produced films. If something is paid and they're, doing it at a paid level, that wouldn't be an internship project. Their job as an intern is to learn all of the hard and soft skills of editing, downloading footage, uploading footage, taking feedback, taking notes, executing feedback, dealing with a quote unquote client. Somebody gives you a note. How do you respond? How do you deal with file transfers? How do you organize your files? All of that sort of stuff that goes beyond the actual skill of editing. And then we also teach them things like different genre styles of editing, the difference in pacing between a social media reel versus a drama versus a horror versus a comedy versus a corporate video. These are all very different styles of editing, while also teaching them some tips and tricks for dealing with sound problems, color problems, how to edit, matching continuity, solving continuity problems, things like that. Anyway, I could talk about that all day. But the thing is, when I give feedback to an intern, versus giving feedback to someone who I am paying as a professional, I give very, very different notes. And the goal of the feedback is different. When I have a note from a professional, I'm not gonna be a jerk, this sucks, fix it. But I may say, can we fix XYZ? I'll give them, I try to validate people and say, hey, thanks, this looks great. I'm really excited about how this is coming together. I'm noticing that this, and this maybe isn't as smooth as it could be. Can we look at tightening this? Can we change this? I'll give more of general sort of notes. I will give timestamped notes if that's important, but I expect them to know what they're doing and I don't expect to have to hold their hand. This is also important to keep in mind, experience matters and hiring people who know what they're doing matters, and it makes a difference. So, for example, I'm going to just read this because this is an actual note that I gave an actual intern. I said, to be clear, this is someone that we had been working with for a while. They were close to their end of their internship and they were making some mistakes that didn't quite make sense, that they would still be making those mistakes. So what I said was, great to see this coming together with an exclamation point. I have a few questions below, but my biggest question is, did you watch this prior to submitting it? I will interject a note here. That is one of the things that we teach is before you upload a file to a client, you watch it yourself and make sure there's no errors. I went on to say in my feedback, there are some really obvious errors, including file glitches where it looks like something happened with the linked media unless you meant to just drop random clips into the sequence. And there are some missing shots, just some black gaps. Overall, it is great to see this coming together, but that level of submitting for review is a little concerning, especially this close to the end of your internship. Please let me know what happened there. I've asked a few other questions below, and I do want to know the answers before you start on the revision so we can ensure this has gotten to a good place before you finish. And to be fair, that intern replied there were some issues with the file. They hadn't realized some things. We dug in and found out what those things were, and I helped them. And then they did a great job and they finished their internship successfully, got their letter of recommendation, their certificate of completion, all of that. If a paid contractor or, an employee uploaded a file like that to me, where there were link errors, media missing, I would not, I would just write back to them. I would be like, hi, just wanted to check and make sure this is the right file. It looks like there's some media link issues. Do you want to check this and make sure this was a file you meant to send to me? Which is a very polite way of saying, excuse me. And then I gave off the notes for the intern. And it was like, I said at this timestamp, we can linger on this shot for a few more frames just to make that really hold. For this next part, the continuity feels rushed. He goes from this emotion to this emotion. There should be a beat in the middle of that. Do we have any other takes? Then another timestamp. We can linger on that for a little bit longer. On this timestamp, we need to establish that this happens. And then I explain it. To a contractor, or an employee, I would probably say, at this timestamp, we have to establish this. And I will dive in a little bit more. This is a film that's in ASL, in American Sign Language. So the note was, we have to establish her getting his attention first because these two characters weren't looking at each other the shot earlier. So for, someone I'm paying, I'm not necessarily going to explain it to them. For someone who is learning, I added in order to communicate in ASL, the other person has to be looking at you. So she wouldn't go from looking away from him and him looking away from her to her trying to sign to him. She would try to get his attention. He would have to see her hands. She would try to sign to him and he would indicate on his face that he can't see her. And then I put in parentheses, as written in the script. I spelled it out because they're an intern. They're meant to be learning. If this was a professional that I was paying, I would expect them to be using the script that I gave them and not need so much handholding. And it goes on from there. I explain why we use POV shots. The shots they picked were a little random. And what I said was, it's fine for angles not to be exactly in line with the character's POV. We're just a point of view for people who aren't film people. POV means point of view. So it's what the character is seeing. And then I went on to say, we're just establishing the room, so it should be a little bit more of the space for the audience's sake. So it's the audience seeing the room from the character's perspective. So the room can be a little bit more clear and it can be less abstract or shaky shots. I noted it doesn't have to be perfect. The style of the film is in and out of focus and handheld, but it can be a little easier to follow and a little bit less of a what am I looking at vibe for the audience. This editor had tried to directly match the line of vision from the actors, but it was more, that section of the film was more to show the audience what is in the room and kind of everything the characters are seeing. So I explained that to them. For a professional, I would be confused why they were using random shots that don't make sense. And I went on and 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 on. By the first 10 minutes of the film, I had given 59 notes, time-stamped. I noted where there was black space. There were places where there was at 9 minutes and 1 second, can you please explain what happened here? 8 minutes, 43 seconds. I said, there's a black frame. Again, this looks like some sort of technical error as the sequence doesn't make sense. And we talked about it not needing to be recut. I have the timeline for this portion, so I don't need you to spend time putting it back, but I'd like to understand what happened with this file. And then I noted if you turn this in for a client edit, it would not be acceptable. And I want to find out what you ran into so we can work to solve that. That's feedback I would give an intern. For a paid person, I would just ask what happened. I'd ask if they had a chance to review the file. If they hadn't reviewed it and it was the first time and they were new with us, I would let them know, just a reminder, that is a very strict policy we have. You have to review the files before you upload. Not to be whatever, but I'm really busy. I don't have time to sit and watch an entire edit that has technical errors in it just so I can go back and rewatch the entire edit. That's time I could have spent doing something more productive. So especially if I'm paying somebody, I don't want to waste my time, our money, their time. It's messed up. So I would ask them what happened. If they had done this before, it probably would become a conversation. And honestly, if they were doing this repeatedly, they'd get fired. It doesn't work. It wastes time. It wastes effort. It doesn't work. So when I say, if you're working with someone, you can't be mean to someone and be like, oh, well, I'm paying them so I can be a jerk. No, I'm not going to write to someone and be like, what the F is this? And you suck. And how stupid are you? That's not helpful. That's mean. No one signs up for that, no matter how much they're getting paid. But I can say hi, I just wanted to check and make sure you reviewed this file before sending it to me. I'm noticing some technical glitches, want to make sure I have the right file. And that was it. That would be it. I'd start there. And then from there, we'd have a conversation and I would look at it in line with everything else and we'd go from there. When someone is with you because they're learning, your job is to teach them. That means you can't just say blah. You have to explain it. You have to give them feedback. You have to give them answers. You have to tell them hey, this is why we're doing this. And I hate to say it, but that means that you have to know. You have to know why you're doing those things. You have to know how it works. You have to be able to imbue data because you have data. So if you're taking on an intern, if you're taking on a mentee, if you're taking on someone who's going to be apprenticing under you, really make sure that you spend a little bit of extra time. It might be a few minutes, it might be a few hours, but when you're talking to them, the feedback isn't the same that you necessarily would give someone who's learning with you. And I will say there are times that we'll hire someone at minimum wage and they are still learning and they get very heavily like data heavy feedback. We don't just tell them like, can you fix this? I have social media interns who come in and they do graphic design work. And I don't just say like, opacity is off. I'll say, all right, let's look at this. Now, if you look at the text, is that text really easy to read? And they'll go, no, it's kind of hard to see because the line art behind it. And I'll be like, exactly. So let's lower the opacity on the line art. It's cool art. I really like what you picked there, but let's pick something a little bit lower opacity and maybe make the text a little bit bolder so that it's really clear what this graphic is saying, because the text is the priority of the message that's being put out for marketing. I shouldn't have to explain that to a professional graphic designer, but I should have to explain that to an intern or to someone who has just started professionally graphic designing. If this is their first, this is their first job, they've never done this before, they're just getting started, we're going to pay them a lower rate and we're going to teach them so that they can grow. I do recognize that in order for this to work, the people around the people who are learning and growing have to know themselves. And that means the people before them had to teach them, whether it was professors or whether it was on-the-job mentors. But I just wanted to go over this because I think it's really important. And when you have a PA on set who is working for you for free, they are not like grunt work. I mean, if you're working for free, you should be literally paying attention to like every possible thing you can like notice or see, listen to how the director gives direction, listen to how the actors respond, watch the way the actors change their performance, pay attention to the way the lights, get placed and how they get moved, and write down words that you don't understand. And you're like, I've never heard of this before in my life. What is this? And then look it up when you're done or ask someone. But when you're the person who hired that PA, you have to realize they are there to learn. And your exchange for having them there is to teach them. So that means, if you say something and you notice they look a little lost, ask if they have a question. If they, maybe you as the director or as the producer don't have time to answer all of their questions, assign them to a department head and make it the department head's problem. No, make it like, give them a buddy, give them someone who they can ask questions to, who they can kind of be with and tag along behind and learn from. Because if they're not going to be getting paid cash, they need to be getting actual experience that they can use that they would basically be paying for otherwise in the form of a class or something like that. So I hope that helps. There's kind of two different ways to talk to people. One is someone who is there for experience, and it really is the person's job to help them. And then the other is, you're a professional. I'm paying you money. I expect you to do your job. And even like contractors versus employees, I talk to them differently, partially because legally that's the difference between a contractor and an employee. A contractor's a contractor. They're not my staff. They're part of my team and I value their services and I value them, and they get birthday cards if they're working for us during their birthday. They get holiday cards. They go on our company holiday gift list. So do our top clients, we value them, but I'm not going to micromanage them. I mean, I shouldn't really micromanage employees either, but the contractor is like a vendor, like they are in control. And I expect them to do their job. I expect them to know what they're doing. I expect them to be professional. And employees, especially hourly employees, I really expect them to do their job, because when they don't do their job or they do it wrong and I'm paying them for their time, what am I paying for? That's money that could be going to literally anything else. It could be going into investing in a movie. It could be going into giving someone else a raise who's doing a good job. It could be going into, assets for the company. It could be going into improved software. It could be going into anything. So keep that in mind when you are either an unpaid intern or a PA, production assistant, if you're a contractor, if you're an employee, or if you're managing interns, contractors, or employees. I will put a little bit of a caveat. I am not a lawyer, and there are very, 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 very strict, specific legal requirements for internships, contractors, and employees and how they're managed. And you have to talk to a labor and employment lawyer who is licensed to practice law in your state and potentially in your city or town, depending on the breakdown. There's different laws in different places. There's different minimum wages in different cities and things like that. So talk to a lawyer for legal stuff. This is just general sort of interhuman relations and things that I hope could make the film industry better. Because if the unpaid people who are showing up and doing the work to get experience actually get experience, it's a great way to get experience and they can really grow. And if people who are supposed to be doing a professional job get held to professional standards, that's important too. because you should be professional if you are a professional. There you go. All right. That's it for today. Bye.
You've been listening to Filmmaking Actually with Koura Linda, Space Dream Productions podcast. Subscribe to us on any or all the podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, leave us 5-star ratings and positive reviews on iTunes. It helps more listeners like you discover the show. But the best thing you can do if you really like the show is tell a friend. Want to leave a comment or ask a question? Email at filmmakingactually@gmail.com. This is Spacey speaking, and remember, and we'll see you next time.